There is one part of the UK that seems to be especially overlooked when it comes to transport, and that is obviously Northern Ireland. However, this really shouldn't be the case. There's a lot that's very interesting about Translink, the nationalised operator of Northern Ireland, and a lot can be learned from it. And we'll also perhaps look at how it can be improved, as whilst there's a lot right, there's also quite a bit wrong. So, public transport in Northern Ireland is operated by a single body, Translink. They do trains, buses pretending to be trams, and so on. Now, this may be for good reason. Translink is extremely popular with passengers. As we can see here, they have some very admirable satisfaction ratings. And where else in the country, perhaps even the world, are you going to find 100% punctuality of departures? One of the main factors behind this impressive punctuality is the fact that Northern Ireland Railways operate an almost entirely self-contained network. This means they maintain and operate all of the trains on the track. Now, travelling with Northern Ireland Railways is quite an experience if you've never done it before. It seems to be that at the stations, well, my experience here was at Ballymena, but I presume it's the same everywhere else apart from the largest Belfast stations, that ticket machines and ticket offices are nowhere to be found. Instead, 10 or 15 minutes before the train departs, one member of the platform staff, or maybe two, comes up onto a little dispatch hut on the station and prints off the tickets using a sort of bus-style ticket machine. It prints out the bus-style ticket receipts as well. It's quite unique. I was actually really impressed by this system. Not because I thought it was better, but because the ticketing staff managed to dish out these tickets at ridiculous speeds and efficiency. You just turn up, ask for a return, and it was done in 5 seconds. It's really quite remarkable. You wouldn't see anything like that in Great Britain. It often takes you 5 minutes, let alone 5 seconds, to get a ticket. Ticket checks were also extremely frequent on the trains, again something quite different to what you'll see in Great Britain. I find it remarkable just how efficient they were with all of this. It was done so much quicker and more precisely than you'd find anywhere else, in my experience. But let's not get too bogged down in the specifics. The actual system is extremely bare bones when it comes to the railways. If you think Britain suffered from the beaching axe, well, take a look at Ireland. Yes, Northern Ireland's railways consist of essentially the line to Derry and Portrush, the line to Bangor, line to Larne, and the line to Newry and Dublin. It's not very much. Translink gets away with this by making their map look like it's a metro system, but if you peel away that, it's really quite obvious this is a very bare-bones network. Be aware, though, that there is no freight traffic anywhere on Northern Ireland Railway's track, which is quite surprising. The passenger stock used are the Class 3000 and 4000 built by CAF. They're more or less identical, but they're quite comfortable. They look funky and they're quite wide, given the large loading gauge of Northern Ireland. They feature 2+2 seating throughout with plenty of tables. They're quite pleasant trains to travel on, have a very regional feel. Amazingly though, despite being newer, the Class 4000 sets don't feature any passenger charging points, which is really remarkable in this day and age. The extravagantly named Enterprise down to Dublin is hauled by Class 201 diesel locomotives, with some form of Irish Mark IV, I believe, and an extremely ugly DVT. Long story short, Northern Irish, well, and all Irish railways to be honest, are very good where they do exist, but where they don't, well, there's no railway. And where they don't is a lot of places. Translink, however, makes up for this by a pretty extensive bus network. It features these sort of core intercity routes known as Gold Line, which are very snazzy. They're essentially replicating a train service where one should be there. Gold Line's fleet is predominantly made of coaches, which is pretty reasonable when you consider the routes they operate. Metro services inside Belfast are given the imaginative name of Metro. The buses are painted in an extremely vibrant pink, which has got to be one of the most out-there liveries you can find anywhere in the UK. The Metro fleet seems to predominantly consist of lots of new vehicles like street decks. There's a sizable number of electric street decks, which is very nice to see. Adam, please, just one moment. Local and rural services around the rest of Northern Ireland are given the name Ulsterbus, and they have a blue livery. Their fleet is a mixed bag. It consists of quite a number of really old Eclipse 1s, and they look pretty ugly. But they've also got a lot of new Eclipse 3s, and believe it or not, this is the first time I'd ever seen one, so I was impressed. However, it isn't perfect. There seems to be a really notable lack of Sunday services almost everywhere. Oh, you didn't think I'd forgotten, did you? There's also Glider, which is an extremely fancy way of saying a right streetcar. They're sort of a prestige bus service that tries to be a tram, and to be honest, it does quite well. You get a lot of the benefits like separated drivers, fancy bus stops, and good looks without having to invest in tracks and overhead wires. Now, admittedly, it is not a solution when you compare it to an actual tram, and ideally they should just replace the Glider with, well, a tram. But it's a good start. Let's now talk branding. Translink has a surprisingly strong but surprisingly weak brand identity, which is a complete contradiction, but I'll explain it. Essentially, their name is everywhere and everyone knows who they are, and their logo, well, their old one was very distinctive. But unfortunately, they've decided to replace it with a T in a hexagon. I don't think that's very original, and though it does look modern, the old one was more unique. It actually seems to be that Translink changes their logo every few years, which is not the right way to go about things if you ask me. But I suppose it does keep things fresh. But all this frequent logo changing is quite confusing for stations. It means that they're covered in an assortment of various different logos and designs from all over the ages, and it starts to look really messy and dated when you see the carpet in Belfast Lanyon Place, by the way. Also, in Belfast Great Victoria Street, I noticed this advert that mentioned new trains on the Larne line. They've been around for about a decade now. Okay, that's the description bit done. Now it's time for the very short section where I say what I would change about Translink. Well, first of all, I'd revert back to the original logo. Maybe give it a more modern twist and spruce it up a little bit, maybe a different colour. But definitely don't go with this new one. It's important to have brand consistency throughout your entire brand's existence. When it's a transport company, that is. Now, what about the actual service? Well, I think it would be a good idea to install ticket machines at all the stations. Now, I know that sounds contradictory given how I was raving about the ticketing system just a few moments before, but I think it would make the system a lot more inviting for foreign travellers. Of course, I also think that Sunday services should be stepped up quite a bit to a point where they actually exist on most routes. They don't have to be at an ultra high frequency or anything, just there should be some way to travel on a Sunday. And to be honest, once that's done, Northern Ireland will have a pretty solid public transport network. I can't really think of anything else realistic to complain about. I mean, obviously I wish there were more rail lines and that more hadn't closed, but frankly I can't see any of them reopening, so it'd be quite unfair to criticise Translink for them. So, well, there we are. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to join my Discord server Abbott first. It's quite transport focused, but not necessarily, so you can talk about whatever you want really. Finally, thank you for watching, and goodbye.